Why was everyone staring at her at the briefing table? She had walked into rooms like this before, steel walls, maps lit by projectors, the low hum of computers. But today, the weight of their eyes felt sharper than usual. She adjusted the strap of her tactical vest, kept her spine straight, and took her seat at the far end of the table. Silence stretched just long enough to sting. It wasn't her uniform, it wasn't her posture, it was the tattoo. The mandala, inked across the left side of her face from temple to jaw, was impossible to ignore under the harsh fluorescent lights. Lines and spirals, etched into her skin after the darkest chapter of her life, told a story no one here cared to ask about. To them, it wasn't survival. It wasn't transformation. It was a mark, a distraction. She could hear the whispers as the colonels reviewed satellite images on the screen. Who brings someone like her onto a mission like this? She'll spook the locals before she even opens her mouth. Sarah Martinez kept her expression unreadable, though her pulse drummed in her ears. Years of training had taught her control. Years of rejection had taught her silence. She folded her hands, letting the voices slide past her like shrapnel, each piece sharp but not fatal. But there was something they didn't know, something none of them could see yet. The mission briefing moved forward. A hostage rescue. A remote valley on the edge of a country most people couldn't find on a map. A militant stronghold carved into stone. Intelligence suggested American contractors, alive but running out of time, were being held deep inside. The task force would insert by night, neutralize defenses, and extract. The kind of mission where hesitation meant death. Her kind of mission. Sarah had spent the last 3 weeks buried in recon reports, memorizing terrain, calculating entry points. She knew every hill, every contour of that valley. While others dismissed her ideas during pre-planning, she had quietly run simulations, sketched alternate routes, and built redundancies no one else bothered to consider. She could see solutions they couldn't. She could feel the patterns, maybe because she lived with one carved into her skin. The colonel at the head of the table cleared his throat. Team Alpha, insertion at 100. Martinez, you'll cover Overwatch from Ridge 2. His tone carried no warmth, just orders. A ripple of unease spread through the room. Overwatch, sniper, the word hung heavy. Someone muttered, hope the ink doesn't glare through the scope. Laughter, muffled but sharp, followed. Sarah didn't flinch. She had learned long ago not to give them the satisfaction. But inside, the same old conflict surged. The tattoo was supposed to be her armor, the proof that she had clawed her way back from despair. Instead, it made her a target. Every mission, every room, every first impression. Still she nodded, copy that. The colonel's eyes lingered on her for a moment longer than necessary. His face revealed nothing, but there was weight in his stare, as if measuring her in silence. Then he returned to the map. The meeting broke. Boots scuffed against tile, voices rose and fell, chairs scraped back. She gathered her notes, ignoring the sideways glances, and slipped out into the corridor. The air smelled of fuel and sweat. Helicopters roared faintly from the distant tarmac. She moved toward her quarters, her steps steady, her body language calm. But inside, the storm churned. 3 years ago, she had been on a very different path. Her father, Sergeant Martinez, had died in Afghanistan when she was still in college. His death had pulled her under, into shadows she didn't think she would escape. For months, she drifted through nights of silence and days that blurred together. The mandala tattoo had been her turning point, painful, deliberate, a permanent reminder that healing was not about erasing scars but wearing them. She wanted it visible, unavoidable. Her survival written in ink. Now survival had carried her here, to a team that didn't want her, to a mission that could break them all. Back in her quarters, she sat on the cot, removed her gloves, and let her hands rest against her knees. The barracks were noisy with men laughing, shouting, bragging. She sat apart, unseen, unwanted. The loneliness was familiar, almost comfortable. She leaned into it, drawing strength from the solitude. because she knew something the others didn't. She knew that under fire all the whispers would vanish. When the bullets cracked and the ground shook, it wouldn't matter what her face looked like. It would matter if she could shoot straight, if she could cover their advance, if she could bring them home alive. And she could. She cleaned her rifle slowly, methodically. Every click of the bolt, every drag of the cloth across the barrel was ritual. The world could doubt her, but the rifle never did. The rifle knew her heartbeat, her breath, the calm she carried when chaos erupted. Her chest tightened as she thought of her father. He used to say, "The mark of a soldier isn't what they wear on their skin. It's what they carry inside." She had carried his words longer than he lived. She finished reassembling the weapon, placed it across her lap, and sat in silence. Tomorrow night she would take her position on the ridge. Alone, unseen, watching over those who mocked her. They didn't trust her yet, but she knew something else. By the end of this mission, they would. And still, there was a question that pressed against her chest, heavy and unspoken. Why had the colonel looked at her that way? He hadn't mocked her, hadn't dismissed her. His stare had been different, sharper, weighted, almost knowing. She didn't understand it yet. But soon she would. The desert night swallowed sound. The helicopters thundered low, skimming their blades tearing the air into fragments of noise. Inside the cramped belly of the bird, Sarah Martinez sat wedged between steel and men who would rather not share space with her. Their helmets tilted down, eyes hidden behind night vision goggles. They barely spoke to her, but she felt their doubts in the way their shoulders angled, in the subtle shift of boots away from her. It didn't matter. The doubts would burn away in the fire. They always did. The mission clock ticked down. She replayed the plan in her head: routes, escape vectors, fallback positions. Ridge 2 would be hers. Alone, she'd watch the valley from above, her rifle, her voice, her scope, her truth. If anything went wrong, if shadows moved where they shouldn't, it would be her finger on the trigger that saved them. Yet still the question gnawed. Why had the colonel looked at her that way in the briefing? That pause, that stare, that strange silence that didn't feel like dismissal. It felt like recognition. The pilot's voice cracked over comms. 1 minute. Boots shifted, weapons clicked, throats cleared. The men around her leaned into the familiar rhythm of combat. She pulled her balaclava up over her mouth but left the tattoo visible, always visible. She had sworn never to hide it again, not in war, not in peace. The helicopter flared, its skids kissing earth. Dirt blasted upward. Team Alpha poured out, shadows racing into darkness. Sarah leapt last, boots sinking into the grit. The rotor wash pulled at her vest, then the bird lifted, swallowed by the black sky. Silence returned, heavy, total, suffocating. She moved quickly, peeling off from the group. Ridge 2 waited, a jagged spine of stone overlooking the compound. Her legs burned as she climbed, muscles tight under the weight of gear, but her breath stayed even. Step. Pause. Listen. Step. The old sniper's mantra pulsed in her blood. She reached the crest, belly crawled into position, and unfolded her bipod. Through the scope, the world transformed. The valley lay below, carved into shadow. The militant stronghold was a cluster of concrete and corrugated metal, its walls pocked with old impacts, its gates sagging but guarded. 2 men smoked near a rusted truck, rifles slung lazy. A dog barked and settled again. Lights flickered in narrow windows. Sarah adjusted her scope, tracing the pattern of sentries, the rhythm of patrols. Her notes matched reality. Good. Predictable was survivable. Overwatch in position, she whispered into comms. Copy Ridge 2, came the reply. It was the team's point man. His voice carried that same subtle edge, that doubt they thought she couldn't hear. She ignored it, focus narrowed to glass and crosshair. Minutes crawled. Alpha Team moved like shadows toward the compound, their shapes breaking and reforming with every patch of moonlight. Sarah tracked them, her finger resting against the curve of the trigger guard. Her breathing slowed, each inhale stretching long, each exhale longer. And then movement. She caught it in the corner of her lens. A glint, not patrol, not friendly. She swung her scope. 3 men crouched along the opposite hers, rifles angled down. Ambushers, waiting. Her voice cut sharp through comms. 3 tangos, ridge line west, prepping ambush. Static, then skepticism. Ridge 2, confirm, we've got no thermal on that. Sarah gritted her teeth. Through her scope, she could see the subtle shift of fabric, the gleam of a magazine sliding home. She didn't need thermal. She didn't need anyone's belief. Confirmed, she said flatly. They move in 10 seconds. Silence, not fire without command authority. Her pulse thudded. The crosshairs rested on the lead ambusher's chest. 10 seconds felt like forever. She could wait. She could obey. And she could watch 3 of her own go down in the first exchange. No. The rifle kicked against her shoulder. The first man dropped, sound swallowed by distance. The second turned in panic, another crack, another fall. The third scrambled backward, trying to vanish into the rocks, but her breath stayed calm, her scope steady. He crumpled with a final twitch of dust. Static burst in her ear. What the hell, Ridge 2? Ambush neutralized, she cut in, her tone even. You're clear. Silence followed, not gratitude, not even acknowledgement, just silence. But she didn't need their thanks, she needed them alive, and now they were. Through the scope, she tracked the team breaching the compound wall. The entry went fast, sharp, clean. Boots through doors, shadows swallowing shadows, the kind of chaos she could only watch from above. Gunfire erupted inside, muffled by concrete, shouts in languages tangled. Sarah swept her scope across rooftops, alleys, windows. Twice she picked off fighters moving toward the breach. Once she dropped a sentry mid-stride before he could raise the alarm. Every shot was invisible. Every life saved when unseen. She had lived her whole life this way, fighting battles no one acknowledged, carrying scars no one respected. The tattoo burned faintly under her skin as if it knew, as if it remembered with her. Minutes stretched, then comms crackled. Package secured, 2 hostiles down, 3 detained in 5. Relief bloomed low in her chest. It wasn't over, never over until Boots left dirt, but the worst had passed. She swept the scope one more time, checking corners, ridges, rooftops. Clear. Then something strange. Through her scope, she caught sight of movement at the compound's far edge. A figure standing still, half in shadow. Not a hostile, at least not dressed like one. Taller. Watching. Her breath hitched. She tightened the zoom. For an instant, she thought she saw something impossible. A face marked by ink. A pattern not hers. Different, older, but unmistakable. And then the figure was gone, slipping into darkness. She blinked, lowered the scope. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Had she imagined it, fatigue could play tricks. Shadows turned into shapes. Shapes turned into ghosts. But this hadn't felt like imagination. It had felt like recognition. The colonel's stare from the briefing returned to her mind. Weighted, knowing, almost connected. Ridge 2, time to move. The voice snapped in her ear. She exhaled, steadying herself. Copy, moving. She folded her bipod, slung the rifle, and began the descent. Rocks shifted under her boots, the valley stretching wide and endless. She moved fast, but her thoughts moved faster. Had she really seen what she thought she saw? And if she had, what did it mean? The tattoo on her face had always been her burden, her story carried alone. But for the first time, a crack of possibility appeared. What if she wasn't the only one? The valley burned with silence after the gunfire. Dust rose in thin veils, curling in the moonlight as Team Alpha regrouped by the compound's broken gate. The hostages stumbled forward, wrists bound but eyes wide with stunned relief. 2 men in contractor gear, their faces pale beneath weeks of grime, clung to the soldiers guiding them. Sarah descended from Ridge 2, her rifle strapped across her back, her steps quick but quiet. She could feel their eyes on her even in the dark, the same doubt, the same judgment, but now something else threaded through it: unease. Because they all knew. If she hadn't fired, the ambushers would have shredded them before they'd reached the wall. They hadn't thanked her, not aloud, but the truth hung unspoken in the space between them. Their survival was tied to her trigger finger. Yet still no words, just avoidance. "Point 3 clicks east," muttered, motioning with 2 fingers. The team fell into formation, guiding the hostages down a dirt track lined with jagged rock. Sarah walked rear guard, her scope raised, eyes cutting the night for threats. But her mind replayed that shadow, the figure by the compound wall, the glimpse of ink across skin, intricate, deliberate, a mark not unlike her own. She wanted to dismiss it, call it fatigue, an illusion conjured by stress and desert light. But something inside her wouldn't let it go. The image pulsed in her memory with the same insistence as her heartbeat. She thought of the colonel again. That stare, that silence, could it be connected? The thought was dangerous. Questions were distractions, and distractions in the field could kill. She forced her breath steady, forced her hands calm on the rifle. Focus. The mission wasn't over until the bird lifted off. Half an hour later, the extraction point came into view, a dry wash marked by red lights. The rhythmic thump of rotors grew louder, cutting through the silence. The helicopters descended in a storm of dust and wind. The team surged forward, guiding the hostages aboard. Sarah scanned the eyes, sweeping every shadow. The valley seemed empty now, too empty. She held her position until the last man climbed in. Then she sprinted, boots hammering stone, leaping into the bird as it lifted. The floor vibrated under her as the helicopter clawed upward, leaving the valley behind. The hostages slumped against the fuselage, eyes closed, safe for the first time in weeks. Team Alpha leaned back, exhaustion etched in their postures. Sarah sat apart, her rifle across her knees, her tattooed face half hidden beneath her helmet. No one spoke to her, no one looked at her. But she had felt it, in the way eyes lingered before boarding, in the silence that wasn't dismissal this time but unease. They knew she had saved them, and they didn't know how to reconcile it with the image they had built of her. Back at base, the debrief stretched long into the early hours. Henderson, the operations lead, droned through casualty reports, ammunition tallies, equipment notes. Sarah spoke only when asked, her answers clipped, precise. When it was over, the men filed out in groups, already spinning their own versions of the night. She remained behind, gathering her notes when the colonel entered. The room shifted. His presence was gravity. Broad-shouldered, silver streaks in his hair, eyes like steel cut with memory. Colonel Robert. He moved with the weight of decades carried in silence. Martinez. Her name from his lips froze her. She looked up, her tattoo stark in the fluorescent light. His gaze held hers, steady, deliberate, not curious, not mocking, something else. "Walk with me," he said. She followed him into the corridor, boots echoing against concrete. The base was quieter now, shadows stretching long. They walked past maps pinned to walls, through the lingering scent of oil and dust, until he stopped outside the open air of the courtyard. The desert wind pressed cool against their faces. For a long moment he said nothing, just studied her, his jaw set, his eyes unreadable. "You disobeyed orders tonight," he said finally. His voice was low, measured, the weight of command threaded through every word. She met his gaze without flinching. "If I'd waited, they'd be dead." Silence stretched. For a heartbeat, she wondered if he would reprimand her, strip her role, reduce her to the tattoo and nothing more. But instead, his mouth curved, not into a smile, but into something like recognition. "You saw what others couldn't, acted when others hesitated. You trusted yourself." His eyes flickered down her face, tracing the ink, then back up. "Not many can carry that weight." Her chest tightened. The words weren't praise, not exactly. They were something heavier. He took a slow breath. "You saw something else tonight, didn't you?" Her heart stumbled. She hadn't spoken a word about the shadow near the compound wall. I don't know what you mean. Yes, you do. His tone sharpened, but not with anger, with certainty. You saw me. Her pulse thundered. Her throat dried. The figure by the wall. The ink she thought she imagined. She stared at him now, the man in front of her, and for the first time the pieces aligned. You, she whispered. He reached for his sleeve, fingers steady, and rolled the fabric up past his forearm. And there it was. An intricate tattoo, dark against his skin, wrapping from wrist to elbow. Symbols intertwined with scars. Spirals woven with coordinates. A story etched in ink, as deliberate and meaningful as hers. Sarah's breath caught. The world tilted, the courtyard fading to silence as her eyes traced the lines. Not decorative, not random. A map of pain, a map of survival. You're not the only one, Colonel said quietly. His fingers brushed the ink, his eyes never leaving hers. This mark, this isn't shame, it isn't weakness, it's proof. Proof of what you've carried, what you've endured. Her throat tightened. All the years of whispers, all the dismissals, all the eyes that saw only ink and nothing beneath, it all pressed heavy in her chest. She had stood alone for so long she had forgotten what recognition felt like. Now standing before him, she wasn't alone. She swallowed, her voice raw. Why hide it? His gaze turned distant, shadowed. Because not everyone is ready to understand. Because sometimes command demands masks. He rolled his sleeve back down, covering the ink. But when I saw you, I knew you, understand. The courtyard was silent, but for the desert wind. For the first time in years, Sarah felt seen. Not by her skills, not by her silence, but by the very mark everyone else had rejected. Yet beneath that recognition, a question lingered. Why was he telling her this now? What kind of soldier hides a mark like that? The question pulsed in Sarah's chest as the desert wind pressed against her skin. The colonel's sleeve was rolled down again, his tattoo concealed, the mask of command firmly back in place. But she had seen it. She knew. And now she couldn't know. Why tell me? She asked, her voice low, as if the darkness itself might be listening. Colonel's eyes didn't waver. They were sharp, but beneath them lay something else. A weariness. A memory carved deeper than time. Because I saw you carry it, he said simply. Open. Unhidden. I saw your courage, walking into that briefing room knowing exactly what they would think of you. And I saw the discipline it takes to keep walking anyway. Her breath caught. No one had ever put it into words before, not the way he just had. She had spent years convincing herself she wasn't brave, just stubborn, that she bore the tattoo not as strength but as defiance. Yet here was a man who looked at it differently. And he spoke like someone who knew. He stepped closer, his voice dropping. My mark, what you glimpsed, it carries 12 names, 12 men who never made it out of that valley in Iraq. I wear them here, etched into my skin, because I refuse to forget them. But the truth, his jaw tightened. Most of my peers see weakness in ink. They see failure, a stain on command. Sarah's chest ached. So you hide it? Yes. His answer was hard, unflinching. Because sometimes survival means silence. Sometimes leadership means swallowing your truth so others will still follow. The weight of those words hung heavy between them. She thought of her father, of the silence he had carried after each deployment, of the weight he never put into words. Maybe command wasn't medals and authority. Maybe it was the quiet burden no one else could carry. Her fingers twitched against the sling of her rifle. Do they know, she asked. The men, the ones you lead now. He shook his head slowly. No, not most of them. To them I am still the colonel, still unmarked, still unbroken. That's how they need me. He paused, his gaze softening. But you didn't flinch tonight. You trusted your own judgment even when it meant standing alone. That's why I showed you, because you remind me of something I lost. The words struck deeper than she expected. For a long moment, Sarah couldn't speak. The courtyard blurred around her, the desert air sharp in her lungs. She had been so used to carrying the tattoo as her wound, her armor, her shame. And here was this man, this decorated Marine colonel, telling her it was something else entirely. Proof. Her voice trembled when she finally found it. They think it makes me less. The tattoo. The mark. Every time I walk into a room, I feel them decide who I am before I open my mouth. And every time, said quietly, you stay anyway. That's strength most people will never know. The silence stretched, no longer sharp but heavy with understanding. Sarah wanted to ask more. About his ambush in Iraq. About the names carved into his arm. About the scars ink could never hide. But before she could, footsteps echoed down the corridor. Voices. The colonel's bearing shifted instantly, the vulnerability tucked away, the mask restored. By the time two officers rounded the corner, he was once again the untouchable figure of authority. Colonel, sir, one of them said, snapping a salute. Reports finalized, hostages stable, command wants your signature. Nodded, his eyes flicking to Sarah one last time. We'll continue this another time, he murmured. Then he turned and walked with the officers, his stride measured, his back straight. Sarah remained in the courtyard, the night pressing in, her pulse racing with questions that had no answers. Had she really just seen behind the mask of a Marine colonel? And what did it mean that he had chosen her, of all people, to share it with? Back in her quarters, she sat on the edge of the cot, helmet cast aside, rifle propped against the wall. She reached up, fingertips grazing the ink etched across her face. The lines and spirals were familiar, carved into her skin as much as her memory. Yet tonight, they felt different. For the first time, they didn't feel like a curse she had to defend. They felt like a language, a story someone else could read. Sleep came fitfully, her dreams tangled with images of her father, of the ambushers falling under her rifle, of the colonel's tattoo gleaming in the moonlight. She woke before dawn, sweat on her neck, her chest tight. The day dragged, debriefings, reports, medical checks for the hostages. The base buzzed with routine, but for Sarah, nothing felt routine anymore. Every glance from her teammates was heavier, every silence louder. They had seen her disobey orders. They had seen her save them. And she had seen something they weren't allowed to. By late afternoon, she found herself walking the perimeter alone, boots crunching gravel, her thoughts circling like hawks. She remembered the colonel's words. Sometimes survival means silence. But silence had nearly killed her once. It was silence that had swallowed her after her father's death. Silence that had driven her into despair, into the ink needle that carved her way back. Silence that had almost kept her from joining the Corps at all. No, she wasn't built for silence anymore. She clenched her fists, staring at the horizon. If the colonel thought she would carry this secret quietly, he was wrong. But then the doubt crept in. Was she strong enough to bear it? Strong enough to stand not just for herself, but for the men she served beside, even when they didn't see her? That night, as the sun bled into the desert, she sat at the mess hall alone. Conversations swelled and fell around her, laughter bouncing off steel walls. She kept her head down, her tray untouched. Until a voice cut through. Martinez. Her head lifted. The colonel stood in the doorway, his gaze fixed on her. The entire hall seemed to hush at once. He nodded once, "Walk with me." And as she rose, every pair of eyes followed, some curious, some mocking, some unreadable. But for the first time, Sarah didn't feel the weight of their stares. She felt something else. Anticipation. Because whatever the colonel was about to tell her, it would change everything. Why did he choose her? The question rang in her mind as she followed Colonel across the dim base. The mess hall noise faded behind them, swallowed by the night. Soldiers glanced their way, then quickly looked down, pretending not to notice. Few ever walked beside the colonel like this. They reached a low, unlit building at the edge of the compound, a storage hangar long abandoned, its walls etched with rust. pushed the door open, motioned for her to enter. The hinges groaned. Inside, dust floated in the beam of a single lantern. "Sit," he said. She obeyed, lowering herself onto a crate, her hands resting against her thighs. Her pulse thudded against her ribs. She had no idea what was coming. Discipline, revelation, maybe both. The colonel remained standing, the lantern light drawing lines across his face. He unrolled his sleeve again, exposing the tattoo that wound across his arm. "I told you last night this mark carries 12 names," he began. His voice was softer now, stripped of command. "But that's not the whole story. You deserve the truth." Sarah leaned forward, caught between dread and anticipation. He traced the ink with his fingers. "Ambush, Iraq, 2007. We were moving through a valley not unlike the one we walked last night. Intel said it was clear. It was. The first IED tore our convoy apart before we even dismounted." His jaw clenched, but his eyes didn't waver. Chaos followed. RPGs from the cliffs, machine guns from the ridges, 12 Marines dead before I could even call support. I led those men into hell, and most of them never walked out. The silence between his words was louder than gunfire. "I carried their faces with me every day after, couldn't sleep, couldn't drink enough to forget. They were there in every mirror, in every quiet moment." He touched a spiral in the ink. "I got this years later, not to honor them, to punish myself. Every line carved while I sat in that chair, I told myself I deserved the pain." Sarah's throat tightened. Her fingers itched toward her own tattoo, the mandala burning faintly against her cheek. She knew that pain, the need to carve suffering into skin, to make it visible because inside it was too much to bear. "I thought it would break me," admitted, his voice low. "But instead it saved me." The ink became something else. Remembrance, yes, but also release. Proof that I survived with them still here. Proof that I hadn't drowned in guilt. Sarah swallowed hard. "And now you hide it." "Yes," his gaze hardened. "Because people don't understand. In this world, marks are misread as weakness. They see a colonel with ink like this and they question everything. My discipline, my judgment, my command. So I cover it. I let them believe the mask." Her pulse quickened. The room felt smaller, the lantern heat pressing close. "Then why show me?" He met her eyes. "Because you carry the same weight. I saw it the moment you walked into the briefing. That tattoo isn't rebellion. It's survival. It's the story of someone who refused to disappear." Her chest constricted. Words stuck in her throat. She wanted to tell him about the months after her father's death, about the nights when silence pressed so heavy she thought she might vanish under it, about the decision to etch the mandala across her skin so the world would never again mistake her suffering for nothing. But all she managed was a whisper. "They think it makes me less." "They're wrong." His answer was sharp, immediate. "The ones who mock, who dismiss, they've never stared down their own shadows long enough to carve them into skin. You've lived through something they'll never understand. That doesn't make you less. It makes you more." Her eyes burned and she hated herself for it. She blinked the tears away, but the colonel noticed. He didn't look away. "Martinez," he said, softer now, "do you know what courage really is? It's not charging a hill under fire. It's not standing tall in a parade. It's carrying the parts of yourself everyone else calls shame and refusing to bury them. You did that the moment you chose to wear your story where the world could see." The words hit her harder than gunfire. Her whole life, she had been treated as if her tattoo was defiance, arrogance, recklessness. But here was a Marine colonel, someone who had bled, commanded, carried more loss than she could imagine, telling her it was courage. For the first time in years, she believed it. Her voice shook as she found it. "Why tell me this now?" Hesitated. His eyes dropped to the tattoo, then back to hers. "Because I see what they don't. I see the way they look at you. The whispers, the distance. I know what it feels like to be judged by a mark you didn't put on for them, and I know the price of carrying it alone." Silence pressed in, thick and heavy. You don't have to carry it alone anymore, he said finally. Her chest tightened so hard it hurt. She wanted to ask what he meant, wanted to ask if he was offering mentorship, protection, something more. But before she could, his radio crackled, cutting sharp through the air. Colonel, command requesting you in ops. Priority briefing. His jaw tightened. He rolled his sleeve back down, the mask snapping into place. We'll talk again. He turned and walked out, his stride quick, purposeful, leaving her in the half-lit hangar, her heart racing, her breath shallow. Sarah sat frozen. The colonel carried scars like hers. He had hidden them, but they existed, carved deep into flesh and memory. And for reasons she couldn't yet understand, he had chosen her to see them. For the first time since she had joined this unit, the loneliness cracked. Not gone, not healed, but fractured. She wasn't the only one. That night back in her bunk, she traced the lines of her mandala tattoo with her fingertips. Each curve, each spiral, each stroke carried the weight of her story. But now it carried something else too. Connection. She closed her eyes, whispering to the silence. I see you, Dad, and I think someone else does too. Sleep took her, dreamless, steady. And in the morning, the mission clock ticked forward. A new operation awaited. Danger brewed on the horizon. But for the first time, Sarah felt the faintest flicker of something she hadn't in years. Not defiance. Not shame. Hoping. What if the next mistake cost them all? The thought circled Sarah's mind as she crouched behind a wall of cracked stone, the desert sun bleeding heat into her back. The second mission in as many days had already gone wrong. Intel said the village was quiet. It was. Now Team Alpha huddled in scattered cover, pinned down by bursts of automatic fire from mud brick rooftops. Bullets snapped overhead, kicking dust into the air. The hostages from last night were already safe back at base, but this operation was different. Supposedly just a recon sweep. Supposedly routine. And yet routine had turned into chaos. Cover left flank, shouted, his voice cracking over comms. Sarah adjusted her rifle, eyes sweeping through her scope. 3 men on the roof, firing wild, untrained but relentless. She exhaled slow, squeezed, felt the rifle buck. One dropped, the others ducked. Her scope flicked right movement. A child, maybe 10 years old, peeking from behind a doorway, wide-eyed and frozen. Sarah's chest seized. Her finger lifted from the trigger. Gunfire thundered again, snapping her back to the present. Martinez, clear that roof, barked. She clenched her jaw, fired. The rooftop fell silent. But the image of the child's eyes stayed, etched behind her own. The team regrouped, clearing the last of the resistance, pushing through narrow alleys until the village quieted. Smoke curled into the sky. The radio crackled with updates. Casualties, 3 militants, no friendlies, mission complete. Sarah lowered her rifle, her hands trembling despite the stillness. She had done her job. She had protected the team. But the hesitation, the boy's eyes gnawed at her. Back at base, the debrief was sharp and cold. Henderson droned through facts and figures, his voice like gravel ground down by repetition. When he reached her name, the words sharpened. Martinez, your delay on the rooftop nearly cost momentum. We cannot afford hesitation. Her jaw locked, she said nothing. But from across the table, the colonel spoke. Her shot cleared the threat. And no one here has the right to question the judgment it took to fire when civilians were nearby. The room froze. Henderson's mouth shut, his eyes narrowing, shifted in his seat. No one argued further. Sarah glanced at the colonel, but his gaze never moved from the reports in front of him. It was as if his words had been nothing more than another order, dropped into the silence. Yet for her they were more. Afterward, she walked the perimeter alone, the desert heat clinging like a second skin. She hated herself for the tremor in her hands, for the boy's face she couldn't shake. She had trained for this. She had lived for this. But no amount of training prepared you for the moments that stayed when the gunfire stopped. Her father's voice echoed in memory. The hardest part of being a Marine isn't firing the weapon. It's knowing when not to. She clenched her fists. She didn't know if she had passed that test today or failed it. Martinez. The voice came from behind. She turned. The colonel stood a few feet away, hands behind his back, his bearing as precise as ever. But his eyes held something else. "Walk with me." They moved along the fence line, dust swirling around their boots. Silence stretched until finally he spoke. "What you saw today, it'll stay with you." Her throat tightened. I hesitated. "You chose." His voice was firm. "There's a difference. You saw a civilian, you measured the risk, and when the moment demanded it, you acted. That isn't weakness, that's discipline." Her chest ached. But what if next time? "There will always be a next time," he interrupted. "And you'll carry every face with you. That's the truth no one tells you before the first shot. You never leave them behind. But that weight, it means you still see people. You haven't gone numb. Don't lose that." Sarah swallowed hard, the boy's eyes still burning in her memory. He stopped walking, turning to face her. His gaze was steady, cutting through her doubt like a blade. "The tattoo you wear, it isn't just your story. It's your reminder that you survived, yes, but also that you can choose to carry life, not just death." Her breath hitched. No one had ever spoken to her like this. Not as a subordinate, not as a distraction, but as someone whose scars mattered. Before she could respond, shouting echoed from the far side of the base. A fight had broken out near the motor pool. Two Marines, fists swinging, voices thick with rage. The colonel's face hardened. He strode forward, Sarah at his side. The men froze when they saw him, shame flooding their expressions. "Enough," barked. His voice cracked like thunder. The fight ended instantly. The men straightened, blood dripping from a split lip, eyes fixed on the ground. He dismissed them with sharp words and silence. But as the men slunk away, Sarah saw something in his face. Not anger, weariness. He caught her looking. For the first time, she thought she saw the weight of his own ghosts pressing through the cracks of command. Later, alone in her quarters, she replayed every word, every look, every silence. The colonel's defense of her in the debrief. His reminder that hesitation wasn't weakness. The way he seemed to know her doubts before she voiced them. And she realized something she had never dared believe. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was learning. The tattoo on her face no longer felt like a solitary burden. It felt like a language she shared with someone else. And in that language, she found something unfamiliar. Guidance. Hope. But hope, she knew, was dangerous in a place like this. Because in war, hope was the first thing the world tried to take away. How much can one heart carry before it breaks? The question pressed against Sarah's chest as the convoy rolled out before dawn, engines rumbling low across the desert floor. The mission brief had been clear: intercept a weapons transfer before it reached enemy hands. Straightforward, predictable. But Sarah had stopped believing in predictable. The air inside the Humvee was thick with silence. Sat across from her, his jaw tight, eyes never quite meeting hers. The others stole glances, quick and sharp, before looking away. They hadn't forgotten her hesitation in the last firefight, and though she had saved their lives more than once, doubt lingered like smoke. She ignored them, resting her hand lightly on the rifle across her lap. She didn't need their faith. She needed her focus. The colonel rode in the lead vehicle, his silhouette visible through the dust. Commanders rarely rolled with convoys like this, but wasn't like most commanders. He stayed close where the weight was, where mistakes turned fatal. Sarah respected him for it. More than respect, something harder to name. The convoy reached the valley mouth just as the sun cracked the horizon. Heat shimmered, rocks rising in jagged walls on either side. A perfect choke point. Sarah's gut tightened. "Movement," she whispered, eyes sweeping the ridges. The radio crackled. "Alpha proceed, nothing on thermal." She gritted her teeth. She had heard those words before. She trusted her gut more than a screen. And then it came. The first blast tore through the lead vehicle, fireball blooming, metal screaming as the Humvee flipped sideways. Chaos erupted. Bullets rained from the cliffs, carving the air with fury. Men dove for cover, shouting, firing back. The convoy scattered, engines roaring, weapons barking. Sarah hit the dirt, rifle up, scope sweeping. She spotted muzzle flashes along the ridge, exhaled, fired. One down, another. Her heartbeat synced with the recoil, steady, controlled. "Colonel down," someone screamed. Her chest froze. Through the smoke she caught sight of him, dragging himself from the burning wreckage, blood streaking his temple. He staggered, weapon up, firing into the cliffs with grim precision. Sarah's body moved before thought. She sprinted low, bullets cracking around her, dust exploding at her heels. She slid behind the wreckage, grabbing his arm. "Colonel, we've got to move." He shook his head, eyes blazing. "Cover the ridge, don't waste yourself on me." Her throat tightened. "With respect, sir, no." She dragged him down into cover, her shoulder pressed to his. Together they returned fire, their rifles speaking in unison. For a moment the chaos blurred, the shouting, the explosions, the burning vehicles, and all that existed was the two of them, marked and holding the line. A rocket screamed overhead, slamming into the far Humvee. Shrapnel rained. Sarah shielded the colonel with her body, grit tearing across her skin. "Martinez's voice cut through comms. "We're pinned, we need a way out." Sarah's eyes swept the terrain, her mind racing. A narrow gully snaked behind the cliffs. She had studied the maps, traced every contour. If they pushed left, they could flank. She keyed her mic. "Follow my mark, left gully 90 meters, move on my fire." No answer, doubt still lingered, but hesitation would kill them all. She rose, fired 3 sharp shots into the ridge, dropped 2 fighters. The path cleared for a heartbeat. "Move," she roared. And this time they listened. The team surged toward the gully, dragging wounded, covering each other with fire. Sarah and the colonel moved last, their rifles cutting arcs of protection. Bullets chased them, snapping stone, but the gully swallowed them, giving cover where the open valley had offered none. Breath heaving, sweat burning her eyes, Sarah pressed against the rock wall. Around her the team regrouped, battered but alive. His voice cracked. "You just saved our damn skins." No sarcasm, no mockery, just truth. She nodded once, words caught in her throat. The colonel leaned against the rock, blood streaking his sleeve. His eyes met hers, steady despite the wound. "You led them," he said quietly. "Not by rank, by conviction. That's rarer than you think." Her chest ached with something she couldn't name. They pushed on, fighting through the gully, breaking the ambush piece by piece until the enemy fire thinned and finally fell silent. The weapons cache was destroyed, the survivors extracted. But the cost lingered. 2 Marines wounded, 1 critical, vehicles lost, and the colonel's blood still dark against his sleeve. Back at base, medics swarmed him, but he waved them off long enough to find her. "Martinez," he said, his voice rough but steady. "What you did today, don't forget it. They'll try to reduce it to tactics, to luck, but it was more. You carried them when they doubted you. You proved them wrong not by words but by action." Her throat tightened. "And you?" He shook his head. "Not me, you." His gaze lingered on her tattoo, then back to her eyes. "You showed them what strength looks like when it refuses to hide." She blinked hard, heat stinging her eyes. The team watched from a distance, their silence heavy but different this time. No whispers, no laughter, just the weight of recognition settling into their stares. That night, alone in her quarters, Sarah touched the mandala on her face. The lines no longer felt like scars carved for herself alone. They felt shared. They felt seen. But beneath the flicker of pride, fear gnawed. The colonel had bled today, and she had seen in his eyes the same thing she sometimes saw in her own reflection. The cost of carrying too much, too long. What if he broke before she learned enough to carry it herself? She clenched her fists, whispering into the darkness, "I won't let you fall." What does it take for a story to change, not just one life, but many? Sarah wondered that, as she stood in formation 2 nights later, the desert wind carrying dust across the parade ground. The ambush had rattled the entire unit. 2 wounded Marines remained in the field hospital. The wreckage of vehicles still smoldered at the edge of the compound. But something else lingered too, a shift, a silence different from before. No one laughed at her tattoo now. No one whispered when she passed. Instead, they looked at her with something heavier in their eyes, questions they didn't yet have the words to ask. And at the center of it all was the colonel. Stood before the assembled Marines, his arms still bandaged, his voice steady despite the fatigue etched across his face. He spoke of discipline, of sacrifice, of the ambush they had endured together. His words carried the weight of command, the kind that stitched fractured men back into a unit. But then his tone changed. "There is something I need you all to hear," he said, his eyes sweeping the formation. "Something you've overlooked, something that matters more than the color of a ribbon or the weight of a medal." Sarah's pulse quickened. She didn't know what was coming, but she felt the air shift around her. He turned, his gaze locking on her. "Step forward, Sergeant Martinez." Her boots felt heavy as stone as she moved, every eye on her. She stopped at his side, the lanterns casting her tattoo into sharp relief. "For weeks," said his voice carrying, "this Marine has endured your doubt, your whispers, your judgments. You looked at her and saw only a mark you didn't understand. And yet, when the bullets flew, when the valley burned, it was her judgment that saved you. It was her courage that carried you through." The silence deepened. Sarah's chest ached, her throat tight. His hand moved to his sleeve. Slowly, deliberately, he rolled the fabric back. The lantern light fell across his arm, revealing the intricate tattoo beneath, lines, symbols, scars woven together. Gasps rippled through the ranks. "This," said his voice firm, "is my story. I wear it for the men I lost, for the battles I survived, for the weight I still carry. You never knew it because I chose to hide it. But Martinez," his eyes flicked to her, steady, unyielding. "She chose to bear hers openly, and that is strength, greater strength than I showed for years." Sarah's breath caught. The entire formation stood frozen, their disbelief melting into something else, something she recognized. Recognition. Judge your brothers and sisters by their actions, not their skin, not their scars, not their ink. The battlefield doesn't care how we look, only how we stand when the fire comes. His words cut through the silence, leaving nothing but truth behind. For the first time since she joined this unit, Sarah didn't feel like an outsider standing among them. She felt like part of the line. After dismissal, men approached her one by one, not all, not with perfect grace, but enough. Stood stiff, his jaw tight. "I was wrong," he said simply. "You earned my respect out there." Others echoed him in their own ways. A nod, a quiet apology, a glance that no longer carried mockery but something closer to gratitude. Sarah answered each the same way, with silence, with a small nod, with the steadiness her father had taught her. Later, under the desert stars, the colonel found her alone by the fence line. His bandaged arm hung at his side, but his eyes carried a softer weight now. "You carried yourself well tonight," he said. Her voice was quiet. "You didn't have to show them, you didn't have to risk it." "I did," he replied, "because they needed to see, and because you needed to know you were never as alone as you thought." The words sank deep, settling into a place she had kept hollow for too long. She looked at him, at the lines etched across his face, at the ink hidden beneath his sleeve. "Do you ever regret it, getting the tattoo?" He shook his head. "Never. It kept me alive when nothing else did, just like yours kept you alive." Her hand rose unconsciously, brushing the mandala carved across her skin. For the first time it felt lighter, not a burden, a banner. The colonel's gaze turned to the horizon. There will always be another mission, another valley, another ambush waiting, but what you carry, your story, your scars, will outlast all of it. Don't ever let anyone convince you otherwise. Sarah nodded, her chest swelling with something fierce, something steady. That night, as she lay in her bunk, she thought of her father. She thought of the colonel. She thought of the boy in the village, of the Marines she had saved, of the ones she hadn't. All their faces, all their weight. And for the first time, she understood. The tattoo on her face wasn't just survival. It wasn't just defiance. It was witness to pain, to endurance, to resilience. When dawn broke, she rose with the others, her rifle slung, her eyes steady. The whispers were gone. The silence was different now. She no longer walked alone. And in the quiet of her heart, she carried the truth the colonel had given her, the truth her father had tried to teach her, the truth inked into her very skin. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.